Bam.
This is Tim Fitzpatrick, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Just a couple of warriors talking war stuff. There's just plenty to talk about these days. You would think at one point our craft would be obsolete, but here we are. It's fresh as a daisy. Always something to discuss. Are we ever going to get past war? You think?
I think after the end of the Cold War, particularly academia, declared the end of history. And that clearly is not the case, with so much happening in the last 2.5 years, much over the last 25 years, but over the last 2.5 years. And we're still thinking that we can wish or talk all of this away and
Yeah.
that history is over. And clearly, as you saw last weekend, that's not the truth.
And we think about like how stable Europe has been, and sure, since World War II, pretty stable. But the collapse of Yugoslavia, the collapse of the Soviet Union, but there's also been wars in the Eurasian zone. With all of it. Every time I think let me make sure I mention Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia have all seen conflict. Now we have this, Ukrainian Russian conflict. It's just it never seems to end. And now there's oh, I don't know, civil unrest in Sweden. There's civil unrest in France. It doesn't seem to want to stop.
Well, a lot of that civil unrest is promoted by the main players,
Hmm.
Russia, Iran, um, lesser extent North Korea, certainly China,
Mhm.
particularly when they're doing their nine-line propaganda in Asia. So uh, those main players still have long-term political objectives,
Yeah.
and and a lot of the West seems to not have any long-term objectives. Kind of just history's over. We'll just sit here, and that's not how it's ever worked. Very trying times. Europe, a lot of issues in Europe right now. Um, you think the Ukrainian war was a wake-up call for NATO, but I'm hoping that they don't press the snooze button on the wake-up call, because I don't know when the last time you were in Europe was, but I went to the German National Training Center at Goose in 2006 and a couple other times. And at that time, they were at where we were in the National Training Center at about 1985, 86 time period. So there's been little investment. They have about, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe 2 brigades worth of tanks that they can deploy. When you think the German army, you think of, you know, uh, parking lots full of tanks. Well, that's not the case anymore. And
Yeah.
their entire Bundeswehr is around 200,000 or so. So that's not much. And you saw Israel just mobilized, 370,000 reservists plus their regular army.
Yeah.
Could Germany do that? No. Poland could
And,
probably do that.
well, yeah, I was going to say Poland. And not just mobilized for the IDF, but like dropped what they're doing, hot soup on the table, and gone, ready. This is a quick reaction with the capital letter Q on quick. I gotta go and
But it
ready.
surprised me very badly when I was in Israel in 1986, 87 timeframe. I was the ops officer for the multinational force and observers. And all of the Israelis I encountered, not all of them, but a huge number of Israelis I encountered were heavily armed. Uzis, M16s, M1 carbines were very popular. A lot of pistols all over the place. And apparently there was a wave of gun control in the 90s that collected all that up, and you have to have a special permission to be armed. So that surprised me in that in the kibbutzim, there was not that immediate reaction at each house
Mm,
to the intruders, to the terrorists. And that
yeah.
really shocked me. Uh, each kibbutz had a tank on each corner, not an active tank, but a dug-in tank, like a bunker,
Hmm.
generator power, so they could defend themselves. So that mentality eroded since the 80s. So I think you're seeing some of the price paid for that loss of the individual warrior within the community.
I want to talk to the PsyOp brain in your head. When we see this, so first off, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, a lot of folks don't realize that there are more countries that don't recognize Israel than there are countries that don't recognize Palestine. So we can't even, as a world, agree on if there are, both those countries exist. That's the first thing to understand.
Right.
And then once they have conflict, we often, as the world, don't understand that. At least if you read Benjamin Netanyahu's recent book, they talk about these conflicts as wars,
Right.
constantly at war, constantly at war. No, that's a war. From here to here, that was a war. From here to here, that was a war. And you're like, oh, that was like some shells. And like, but that's not how they see it. And certainly not how Hamas sees it.
Right.
How we keep score, how people protest about it. I don't know that we're connected in a real way here in America with actually how serious that conflict is.
It is extremely serious. And I think what I've seen lately in the attitude and imagery, certainly out of academia and certainly within Europe, is that Israel is the bad guy. And even when you see dozens or many or hundreds of rockets coming out of Gaza and out of the north, the Israeli response has been to create Iron Dome and not do much else about it.
Mm.
But still, they get blasted for any response to all of the bombs. Can you imagine if New York City was regularly shelled out of Canada, what the
Yeah.
reaction would be? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So Israel has decided to, in my view, put up with a lot of that rocket fire and other deadly means out of Gaza in hopes that they would avoid a larger conflict and not look like the bad guy. So I think they were a little shocked about what happened last weekend. I think everybody has been shocked.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you see the call for people call it global protest. It was not that term. They used global jihad. And you see that acted out across the world right now. I don't think as successfully as they hoped, but you do see large protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and a lot of stirring the pot globally
Right.
in support of the Palestinians. Not so much in support of the Palestinians, but against Israel.
The anti um, the anti-Semitism that's been free with people is a bit shocking. And heads of state and heads of religions with the free anti-Semitism stuff is alarming.
Yeah, it it is. I mean, even Putin. I don't know if you saw his commentary on what's going on there. He even walked a fine line, though, which has shocked me.
Mm.
But you see the Iranians on the full diplomatic tour of the Mideast trying to gain support for action against Israel. Tunisia, Algeria, Libya
Right.
commentary. But what you don't see is an overwhelming move to relieve the humanitarian disaster that's facing those in Gaza. You see all words against Israel, but again, nothing to support the people of Gaza. And
What do you make of that?
well, ever since 1947, 48, when all the people in then the British protectorate, when the Arab states decided to crush the Israelis and to drive them into the sea. Their idea was to destroy everybody in Israel. They asked the Arabs to move out of the way so they could maneuver freely. What you see as so-called refugees now are the second, third, fourth generation of those people who moved aside. And they've been used as political fodder, cannon fodder, for all of those actors against Israel. And it's larger than that. I think if you look at who helped start the PLO, Fatah, and all of those people, and you see two factions that did that. One, the Arab nationalist faction, out of the residue of what the Nazis created with the Muslim brigades in the Balkans, and with sending the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem to Jerusalem, and then the Nazi diaspora of former officers who moved into Syria, Egypt, and all sorts of other places. And then the communists under the Soviet Union with liberation groups that they formed worldwide to fight as front-end troops for what they were trying to do to extend communism throughout the world. Part of that is, if you see where folks like Yasser Arafat and a lot of the other Fatah, PLO, and other nationalist Arab groups went, they went to Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow, which was their liberation academy. And that is how they train people, organize, network them with things like the terror groups, Red Brigades, and all the others in Europe in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They kind of went away after the Soviet Union, sort of went away after the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
The reason they didn't go away is because that's what their living was. They made money on that. So you see a lot of these people keeping that alive, certainly to continue that feed of money and resources. And that still affects negatively the people in the so-called West Bank and Gaza. So that continues.
You've done work between, or at least in the seam between Egypt and Israel. And I don't know how much work you've done in between, the seam between Jordan and Israel, but that's an area where we've had progress. And you see this now in the current conflict. That's not true with Lebanon, but those two states they're not going to cooperate with any kind of nonsense, because they don't want to go backwards, right? They're trying to be modern states.
Jordan, no. Jordan is, but they're the same people as the so-called Palestinians.
Right.
I mean, there's no difference. People say, well, those are Jordanians. There's no difference.
Right.
And that could have been part of this two-state, or even earlier on, if you read some of the things Golda Meir talked about or hoped for, and Ben Gurion, they had hoped for a one state with everybody at one time. And that became clearly not possible at the end of World War II.
Right.
So the Jordanians will not. Egypt is walking a fine line. Sadat died basically for peace, to create a opportunity for Egyptians to become economically independent and independent of being used as a tool by the Soviet Union. So he paid the price for it and was killed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And Hamas is I wouldn't call it a breakoff, but an extension, a branch from that same tree of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Except far more vicious than the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Muslim Brotherhood has conducted such raids inside of Egypt. Some tourist things many years ago. I was on their menu one time, not because I'm anything special, because I was an American with a, American officer.
Yeah.
I got locked down my last week. I was going to try to tour Cairo a little bit and got told, no, you're going to be locked down because there was some action against U.S. Embassy personnel. And I think my name came up on a menu somewhere. So I had my car keys taken and locked in a room until I departed back for the States at the end of my tour with the MFO. So, and we still have a battalion of MFO, U.S. troops in the Sinai.
That's right.
The MFO is still in the Sinai. Most Americans don't understand that. And we still have I don't know what the total number is, but 900 in Syria?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many thousand in Iraq. So all this saber rattling by Iran, there's troops on the ground already all over the Middle East, Bahrain, Qatar. So when we talk about whether or not U.S. troops will be there, they are there.
Yeah. Been there.
Yeah. So,
yeah. It's interesting. And now a couple of carrier groups. And anytime carrier groups come, that should be a calming influence. But I don't know.
One on station right now. Just one.
One en route, right?
And one en route. So that's 10 days, give or take a few days. So until you see the second one appear, that's a gap.
Yeah. If you operate for Hamas and you have a cell phone or a life and you worked on that day in Israel, you got to believe that your life is short and that Israel's never going to arrest until your heart stops pumping or until some metal flies.
They left.
Say it again.
The digital footprint that they left.
Yeah.
I would imagine that is going to be a point of interest, because anyone who left a digital footprint inside of Israel is a combatant.
Yeah.
And an illegal combatant.
Mm-hmm.
So you're correct.
And they'll go, look, Golda Meir set the standard, right? They'll go to the ends of the earth and they'll wait decades. They'll find you. They're not going to stop.
Well, apparently 2 of the leaders have already been stopped by bombs. So they've been fairly accurate in targeting that.
Yeah.
But we'll see how far that goes. The use of Facebook and all other social media by the terrorists, by using the individuals that they were killing's accounts to live stream that, is horrific.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen much of that.
I try not to watch. I've had my fill of
I know.
all that stuff. I will say this again, like going back to the Hamas person who plays in that game. Any person you meet, any new person you meet, any person who looks at you, it's going to be all around you. Even if it's not there, you're going to wonder who it is.
Yeah.
Right. And when it's coming, and it's going to drive these people crazy.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that load is going to be like on them, because you're always wondering where it's going to come from. And it is coming. It is coming. Like they're going to be picking these guys out. They're going to make it obvious. It's I don't know.
But they're prepared for that.
I mean, they can say that.
Yeah. But life to them is not about lattes and retirement.
Yeah, that's true too.
It's about jihad. And the ultimate end of jihad is martyrdom.
Yeah.
So that's where the foot soldiers are at. Now, contrast to their leaders. Their leaders don't even live in Gaza.
Yeah.
They live in Doha, in Qatar.
Yeah.
And they live a very, very wealthy lifestyle. And they're facilitated by the government of Qatar to coordinate activities inside of Gaza. So their rulers, the decision makers that sent, what is it now, 1,500 bodies that have been found, Gazan bodies inside of Israel so far, they're not coming back. But that doesn't stop the fine dining of their leadership in Doha. So I don't know if the people of Gaza has put that together, 2 and 2 together.
Yeah.
And now those them from departing their buildings. If they're told to leave, the Israelis will go knock, knock
Yeah.
building and tell people to leave, but they're being told, don't leave, stay in the building.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really carrying. You talk about toxic leadership.
Yeah. 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 And if you give a guy like me, my job, and I'm on Israeli side, I'm gonna start flipping people, with some lattes, with some "Are you awares" and some pictures, and if you're my buddy and you're helping me on the PsyOps side, we're gonna have a field day flipping people because we only got to get lucky a couple of times and find some people that'll like, wait, what?
Well, the tragedy is already there. And it's going to get worse because Egypt will not take any to date. They won't take any refugees. Turkey won't take any refugees.
That's right.
So again, it's a rewash of what's happened with those people ever since the Arab invasion with the big armies, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Iran. Well, I can't remember Iran, yeah. And all those other troops invaded in the 40s and told them to clear out. They never accepted those people. Kuwait did, but then they've expelled them since then, a large number of them. So they were never integrated into their societies, and they're still treated almost 80 years later as so-called refugees. Those are not refugee camps because they're political tools. You can use the term refugee, and it puts in someone's mind someone in a tent, someone who's in immediate distress, and Israel caused it. Even though you see from all the buildings, that's not a refugee camp. That's a fully developed city. Of course, most of their water pipes are gone into rockets, but they're not refugees. But that term is still applied,
right?
And particularly in academia in the United States. And they're still accusing Israel of occupying. What are they occupying? The term means two different things. People in the West conflate that with suppressing people in the West Bank and Gaza. Israel's not in the West Bank and Gaza. They left there and walled that off. The term in the Islamicist Palestinian mind, so-called Palestinian mind, is not how we consider it. Occupation is that there's a Jew living and breathing anywhere in Palestine. And occupation will be over when all the Jews in Palestine are dead. Yeah. That's what they mean by occupation.
Right. Yeah.
So, you saw that as one of their reasons for how the attack went last weekend. They were there to annihilate, not to conduct military operations.
Do you see the IDF pushing back on Lebanon because they're a problem for them as well?
This morning, they started evacuating a strip along the Lebanese border. There's been a lot of discussion about what will happen when Israel commits to Gaza, and will that initiate a Iranian-backed assault from the north? I think it's pretty obvious it would. So I think that's one of the reasons you don't see a massive ground movement anywhere yet by the Israeli army.
Right.
For them to withdraw everybody from that border strip is interesting. So I don't know what the Israeli ultimate strategy is going to be, but clearly they're aware of that threat from the north and the threats coming out of Iran to use everybody else's body to assault Israel. Certainly, if you're using their forces.
If you're a PsyOps guy in Israel and you're calling the American counterpart, what are you asking for that you're not getting? What are you trying to convince someone of that no one's seeing?
I think the information space is big. Identifying trends in the information space, because that's where a lot of this battle is going to be fought, like it is in Ukraine. I think weapons, ammunition, certainly political support, um, political support in the UN. Good
Mhm.
luck with that right now.
Yeah.
Regional political support. Uh, and I think you're seeing that. I think Blinken and Austin did quite a bit of a tour here, keeping or attempting to keep, and I think so far they're successful, the Saudis and others on board for the extension of the Abraham Accords. And quite frankly, I think this is one of the reasons this is happening. Those Abraham Accords shook Iran and the Islamicist world, the Muslim Brotherhood,
Telling
because
you.
because it said our issue is no longer with Palestine,
That's right.
Palestinians. It's now um, about us and bringing all of our people out of the darkness. So they're not the central concern of our lives anymore. And so they're no longer tools, which means to a lot of them, it's no longer politically useful for Iran if that occurs. Certainly not politically useful for PLO, Fatah, Hamas, and Hezbollah.
Yeah.
So that means money dries up. So
Hmm.
perhaps those lunches in Doha are not as fine.
Yeah.
So that's the big threat, to upset
Yeah.
the boards.
I know there's a whole lot of us that don't want to hear it, but the fact that President Trump sent his Jewish son-in-law into the Arab world and started brokering deals, we hate to hear that, but fact of the matter is that they could have completed some more of those accords, you
The
know?
Abraham Accords are what academia and the Middle Eastern or Arabist academics believe could never happen until
Yeah,
Israel was gone, and it happened.
it did
And
happen.
it was not just his son, but there's a whole lot of players who spent
Sure.
their lives in the region, some of them military, that helped facilitate that and build that trust.
Yeah, I use that way to characterize it because that's the part that nobody can stomach,
Right.
and instead of, and here's the thing is a savvy statesman can say, hey, there's a path. I'm not bound to a two-state solution. I can just go do a multi-state pattern and say, why are we stuck in the past? Why are you sending money to this? Why don't you partner with
Right.
this and normalize with this nation and start making some money, you know, and go forward,
The lie
among other things,
of
right?
the two-state solution, the UN offered that, the General Assembly in 1947
Yeah,
offered that, and Israel readily accepted.
right.
And then they were attacked by every Arab army in the Middle East.
That's right.
So they have
Over and
accepted
over and over
the
again.
solution since the beginning. And
Yeah,
everybody yells at them for not accepting the two-state solution.
yeah.
But now that's impossible because
It's
Hamas
impossible. Yeah,
is philosophically, politically completely different than Fatah and PLO.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
not the same, and there's not a government that governs both. When Fatah and PLO originally stood up as the government, they advertised that they were the government of both Gaza and the West Bank.
That's right.
You don't hear
Yeah.
that.
The if you read some of Golda Meir's speeches, one of the things she talks about in the early 70s is that, since our founding, 25 years earlier, we have every year we have had to fight and we have won every single war because our neighbors continue to attack us,
Yes.
and so you start to realize what this means for them. And then they have this horrific kidnapping and murder at the Olympics.
Yeah.
And then you fast forward, here we are 50 years later doing the same things over and over again.
Yeah.
I'm Israel, and here's this thing like, okay, we believe you. And the doves have tried. The doves have tried over and over again with Israel. And it's like, well, we can't keep telling the hawks no. So they're going to let the hawks fly. And the hawks are going to go tear some hearts out. And frankly, they get to,
Well, Sadat
because,
Sadat
yeah,
realized that this endless cycle of violence was destroying his people, And that's why people say, well, if he could have, he would have wiped Israel off the face of the earth in 73. That was not any of his objective at all.
Right.
His objective was to force Israel into negotiations and break
Yeah.
the status quo. He did that and then signed the Treaty of Peace between the two states. And that shocked, that's why he was killed. That shocked everybody because he realized that endless cycle was turning his state into a puppet of the Soviet Union, was destroying any hope that Israel or Egypt had for
Yeah.
normalization, economic growth. And the Egyptians have been different than the rest of their Arabs, but the Egyptians have been different as a people than the rest of the Arab world. So he wanted to bring some normalcy back to Egypt.
Yeah.
So they weren't sacrificing everything they had for something that would never come to fruition. And he was willing to accept Israel.
And he wasn't the only one that died
Yeah.
during that conflict for that. There was other leaders from that era that were killed because of their stance to try to normalize.
Yeah.
And
well, he was
still
shot to death in that parade by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
General Kingston was in the stands about 4 rows behind him when that occurred too. And he hit the prone relatively quickly during that event and didn't get shot, but quite a few people in the stands who were Sadat's supporters and on his team were shot.
Yeah. It's it's one of these things where I don't know if this conflict now will be severe enough that it will allow for there to be some relief of the tension, and there'll be enough people that this will be a straw that causes the camel to stop and rest, and maybe that'll happen. I don't know, but it sure is an opportunity to move past some of this and maybe conclude some of this part of the war and get people who had been invested in this to move on to something else.
Well, if you look at who really benefits by this in the mid and long range, Iran and Russia, is it in their best interest to let this quickly end? And I would say that they will do everything in their power to not let this quickly end and to expand it. You saw last week that we landed ammunition in Israel. But what does that tell about our sustaining base in the United States? We're already strapped in trying to provide ammunition to Ukraine. And we are trying to ramp up production of 155 millimeter rounds. Just let contracts at the end of the fiscal year. You know how that goes.
Yep.
We need to execute these contracts now. It's 15 September.
Right.
That will ramp up artillery round production of 155 to about 100,000 rounds a month by 2026. We were producing about 14,000 rounds a month in 2020. Think about that.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians have been shooting 150,000 or more rounds a month during this war. Well, the math says I can't get back to restoring what I've already given them at those production rates
Right.
for 10 years. Meanwhile, my stocks are being depleted.
Right.
So if you don't surge that to 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 rounds, then what happens if Taiwan needs them? What happens if South Korea needs them?
Yeah.
So you might see somebody trying to push North Korea to do something in South Korea. You might see someone trying to expand this war in order to take advantage of our lack of preparedness.
Yeah.
We're retiring more ships in this last fiscal year and this year than we're producing. Well, the plan is to produce more. Well, no, that never happens. So that Navy you see parked off there and going to be 2 carrier battle groups. What's the total capacity of the U.S. Navy? Something that Obama mocked. What's our senator that's from Utah that's going to retire here? When he was running for president, he mocked him for talking about the numbers of ships, talking about the industrial base,
Right.
saying, well, we have technology. Well, if you have a little bit of technology, but they have overwhelming mass all over the world, then your little bit of technology can't do that.
Yeah.
You've got to.
I'm here. Don't worry,
Okay.
I'll take care of it. Yeah, the technology thing and the ship thing is interesting. And I hear what you're saying. And I'm not saying that these aren't problems. It is interesting to think about Russia and their influence. Like we think of Russia as being a singular entity, but it's always been the case that Putin has influence in other places.
Yeah.
And I am not saying that this happened, but I'm saying that Putin can say, I'm going to distract and cause, increase the likelihood of a conflict somewhere else. I'm
Yeah.
going to pull my Middle Eastern lever and presto changeo, like these things are connected. The man is tremendously influential.
He was trying to do
And
that in Syria.
right. Yeah. And so these things can be connected. I don't know that if we chose to, we could ramp up our ability to create rounds, right? And it's just a decision. It's just a congressional thing. And we just say we're going to do that.
We just
Are
did
we
that.
willing to, yeah.
But
And,
that's
and are
only
we willing to
100,000 rounds a month.
are we willing to do it more? And are we willing to do it for Ukraine? Are we willing to do it for Israel? And there's an election coming, and are people going to run on saying we're not going to do that, right? And
They're going to run on that. But are we willing to
right,
do it? More important than any of that, are we willing to do it for ourselves?
right, yeah.
Look
And
at what happened to Roosevelt when he started ramping up our production for our own defense in the 30s,
yeah,
the late 30s, 1940.
right.
The assault against him across both spectrums of the political world.
We can't even have a Speaker of the House right now.
Yeah.
Because we can't get along, right? And Ukraine all of a sudden has become this unimportant thing while we look at Israel, and it is very complex. And so, although I don't think Taiwan is a real thing because it's just too hard to get over there, but North Korea might be emboldened, and Putin has enough resources to say, here's what I'll do for you. Maybe there is some influence there, and it does cause more problems for America.
China would not have to get over to Taiwan in order to create a storm over the Taiwan question.
Right.
But could they do it now? I think they could, but at massive cost to themselves.
Boy, that would be bad.
But,
that would be bad.
The U.S. is not on the hook in any treaty, in any way, shape, or form to defend Taiwan. Despite President Biden's language, they had to walk that back because our language since Nixon's normalization with China has been that Taiwan is a part of China.
Yeah.
So we do not have a treaty, a defense treaty, or any integration other than what we do with them on a day-to-day basis. So are we obligated to defend Taiwan? And the answer to that is politically and internationally and diplomatically, no.
Right.
And then you get to the question, would the American people accept a war with China over Taiwan? Probably not.
Right.
So could China create a huge storm over that and divert us further diverting U.S. resources? And would that support Russia and Iran? Certainly they could.
If they moved a couple of brigades to the coast, that would be enough right there to cause a huge kerfuffle. Well, would they dare to put boats in the water? Oh my God, that'd be so bad. That would be like this. They would drown themselves at a rate that would be unsustainable.
They're getting much more proficient. Their Navy is huge and is getting much more proficient. They're using our Navy as a model. one of the most brilliant things that Trump did, and no one will give him credit for this, is to change the header on paper from U.S. Pacific Command to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and start a very strong dialogue with India that was highly successful. And that forced China to back off its 9-line strategy a lot and shift forces to the Indian border, Bhutan, and all these other places. And you see a lot of conflict now along the Indian border because of that. And the Indians were already leery of China and had wars with China. And they were much more, they looked forward to that support from Trump. I don't see that kind of engagement right now with India at all. But that was a very, very successful effort on the part of Trump. And he will never be recognized for that, of course. One failure he did was when we killed, what was his name, Soleimani?
Yeah.
When all those ballistic missiles were fired from Iran, I think we should have carpet swept every available target in Iran. We didn't have to go boots on the ground, but I think we should have retaliated severely at that point. Same problem that Bush did in 2003, 4, 5 time frame, when it was clear that the Quds Force and Iran were producing all the explosively formed penetrators in Iran. We should have eliminated all those plants and those forces then. But no one wanted to, quote unquote, expand the war.
Yeah.
They learned.
Go ahead.
They learned from that. That taught
it was an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
You don't want, and probably President Trump wasn't the guy to do that, because it turns out he was pretty dovish, right? He didn't want to add war, and that was his thing. But you're right, lobbing a couple extra missiles might have continued to knock Iran back a little bit. But let's get back into the region, and let's talk about Israel and their look at Iran. It wouldn't be a surprise at all to see them send some planes over and take out a couple of targets, because if I was them, I wouldn't trust that Iran wasn't doing something to weaponize their nuclear assets. Like Iran can say whatever they want, because Iran has also said they want to wipe Israel off the map with nuclear weapons. The next time they say it won't be the first, and it won't be the last.
Some of the rhetoric coming out of Tehran right now leads me to conclude that they might think that they could do that. When you think about what that would cost, is Israel is very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
And any available targets that they would seek to use any nuclear weapons on would involve massive death of those in Gaza and in the West Bank, which they don't care about. But to them, the destruction of Israel is worth killing all those Arabs, because they don't care about them. Another thing to consider is Iranians are not Arabs.
That's right.
So, and Saudis very well aware of that. They're Muslim, but they're Shia Muslims, and they're definitely not Arabs.
One of the things that's interesting about Iran and Saudi Arabia is that though they have their divide in terms of religion, they will work together if it undermines a common enemy. Right. Everybody thinks that the Sunni and the Shia won't play together, but they certainly do if it means like a weakened Iraq, or a combined approach against a common benefit for them.
Right.
And there's that as well. And so they certainly, one doesn't want to be arrayed against the other at the other's, detriment, if that makes sense.
I think Saudi Arabia rightly feared, prior to Desert Storm, the Iranians re-entering the war with Iraq and threatening Kuwait, Basra, and the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia. So I think that fear is always in the mind of Saudi Arabia as far as Iran settling the Islamic divide score between Sunni and the Shia. But they all operate on the enemy of my enemy is my friend basis.
Right. Yeah.
But right now, I think, particularly with what you see in the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the other states in the Arabian Peninsula, Iran's clearly the enemy. Saudi Arabia. And you see the small naval war, the missile attacks, the rebels in Yemen. So that's quite active. So it appeared to Saudi Arabia, and it is clear in my mind, that Iran is trying to surround Saudi Arabia with their influence and their actions.
Yeah. Yeah. What is there a scenario where, look, Israel's going to be aggressive in its aggressiveness. They're going to go after Hamas, and the distance between Hamas and Palestine is not as great as a lot of people want it to be, especially when you read the Palestinian leaders' open statements because they are members of Hamas. So, is there a scenario where we see Israeli leaders in The Hague answering for war crimes?
For what war crime?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that even possible? Are we going to see Benjamin Netanyahu, standing up for something because they get aggressive and do something? Is there enough push, or do they have carte blanche? I mean, that's really the question, right?
One of the strong suites of the ethos of the Israeli army and their knowledge of their history going back 5,000 years is to conduct war in a lawful manner. And that includes the law of God as well as the law of war. One of the things you see is them not putting others on death ground. What I mean by death ground is there is only one way out, and that's to die. That's not how the Israelis operate. So you will see that in operation. That's why you're seeing not a ground war starting this minute, because they're going to be very, very cautious, very, very deliberate, and very cold in terms of not being in the heat of passion before they execute any operations. So they're going to do that in a very systemic way, because the only thing they have to exist as a state is their legitimacy as a government and their legitimacy in the eyes of the world. If they lose that, then they will lose their existence. So I think you will see an incredibly deliberate approach on the part of the Israeli government to not see anything like you saw last weekend on the part of Hamas, which was not deliberate, was passionate, was indiscriminate, was one of the most disgusting things I've ever witnessed in my life.
Sure.
And Israel will, and people criticize him for this. And there's a lot of things. Well, now the gloves are off. Well, what do you mean by the gloves are off? What do you mean by aggressive action? And I think in terms of the way the Israelis think, they will be very, very concerned about doing everything by the book. Does that mean that they're going to be kind and put a mint on everybody's pillow? No. But they're going to be very, very aggressive in a lawful way.
Yeah.
That solve all the academics in the West and the naysayers? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But Israel's only means of survival is its legitimacy.
All right, let me push back on that a little bit, because Israel does have a history of not always doing that, right? So,
like when,
like when they kidnapped Adolf Eichmann from a foreign country without due process, when they blew up an innocent dude in the Nordic states as part of Wrath of God. They've done some things, but they've crossed the line legally. So you go into a foreign nation and you kill somebody or you kidnap somebody.
What we're talking about here is the call for Israel to unleash wanton destruction.
Yeah.
Completely different from that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I'm bringing that up because
Adolf Eichmann's kidnapping was considered by the rest of the world as to be lawful. It was not considered by the host nation to be lawful because they were harboring.
Right. I mean, it is technically
this
against
day,
the law, right? Yeah.
To this day, they are harboring Nazi camps in Latin America, South America.
Yeah.
So they went in and got them.
Right.
That was awful.
Yeah.
Of course, we've been
And they
criticized for the same
they
thing.
did it as a covert op, right? And
Right.
so they knew what they were doing was not legal. And I have no problem. I think everybody's okay with the fact that they did it, but they know they have to cross the line to go do some of these things. And when you do kill an innocent person, even if it's by mistake and is an act of vengeance for something else, that puts you in the gray zone. I understand why they do it, but the next time they kill an innocent person as in retribution for something that somebody else did, it's not going to be the first time.
Wow.
And so there is fair criticism there.
Inside their military operations, you will see a major effort to avoid any unnecessary loss of life.
Right.
But describing what combatant is going to be interesting.
Yeah. And you and I both know too, like during combat operations and you're encountering civilians, you are doing your best to sort things out, but it is combat operations. And then once the all clear is sound, then you go into a different mode and aid is rendered and things change. But there are different things where life and death is sorted out differently. And so that is not something that regular people are supposed to understand. And so when I'm pushing back with understanding that you're 100% right. When you're clearing a building and you've said everybody needs to get out, we will sort you out the door or whatever, and you don't get out, it means that you are a combatant until we decide that the combat operation is over.
But in the age of cell phones and drones, you've got to be even that more cautious to live up to that word, in fact, on the ground.
Yeah.
So if you do see clearing of buildings, you're going to see a lot of troop rotation.
Yep.
So that you don't have the degradation of judgment due to fatigue that would cause things that you do not want to see on camera.
Yeah.
And you will see a very, very deliberate action. I don't know if you'll see that very soon, given what's shaping up to be a very deliberate attempt to get a two-front war going.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting when it occurs. But they've already asked people in Gaza to move south of that river. Not much of a river, but to move south of it. Really a wadi when you think about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that means for what they're going to do in northern Gaza.
Is there a Gaza Strip that as inhabited by Palestinians in 5 years?
Yeah.
You think so? You think they'll move them back in at some point?
Well, I don't think they're going to be allowed to get out of Gaza. The Egyptians certainly are not letting them into northern Sinai.
Right.
And that was something that people wanted to do at the end of the 73 war negotiations to create an expanded Gaza for the Palestinians between what you see at Rafah now and El Arish. And Egypt wouldn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
But that area is fairly well populated now. So I don't think that's possible. But the northern Sinai is not very well populated.
Yeah.
So Egypt's not about to offer any solution that would involve any trading of their land because they don't want Hamas and the Palestinians in Egypt.
Yeah.
Could they have done that? Yes. Could they accept refugees now? Yes. Will they? We've got to work on that to avoid a humanitarian disaster. And the Egyptians have really pushed hard on Hamas, closing tunnels, sealing off the border, creating forces in that area across from Gaza that were not envisioned in the Treaty of Peace between the states of Israel and Egypt, and working in cooperation with that and the MFO for security. So a lot depends on what Egypt does, and a lot depends on what the Arab states and international organizations are going to do to try to relieve the humanitarian disaster that's about to unfold. Hamas, on the other hand, wants to keep everybody in place, so they have plenty of video of Gazans dying in the assaults. They don't care about the humanitarian issues.
Yeah, and I don't know what the percentage is of Gazans to people who are in Hamas, but it's going to be tough to sort that out. And look, if you were in Hamas and you're like, I just want to go back to being a Gazan, I just want to run a bakery, and how do you even begin to get that back with all the rubble and damage that has been done to infrastructure there? And if it's going to be Israel's problem to get those folks back up on their feet, because someone has to do it, and apparently no one else at the national level is willing to help,
The
they're
Israelis
going to want to promise.
The Israelis have spent huge funds on building up Gaza during their occupation of Gaza.
Yeah,
all that structures you see didn't pop up overnight in Gaza after the Israelis left. Same in the West Bank. So they spent a lot of money on doing that.
Yeah,
they were hiring. I think it was upwards of 30,000 or more Gazans were leaving every day to go to work in Israel over the last few years.
right.
That's gone. That income's gone.
Mm.
Those workers are gone. So what's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
And how many of these kids who died inside of Israel were given a prayer mask and an AK-47 that day with instructions of what to do with it on the invasion of southern Israel?
Yeah.
So who's a combatant? And that's going to be very tough. And who's a member of Hamas?
Yeah.
That's going to be very tough for Israel to sort out.
And again, if this problem is going to be left up to Israel to solve because, we can't move these folks out, then it's up to Israel to sort out. And it's their problem. It's going to be their problem. And then we have to kind of stand back and let them deal with it. Whether
they've been getting from Iran and from Qatar and from all these other states, they've been getting hundreds of $millions a month into Gaza in aid. And through the UN Works and Reconstruction Agency, UNRWA, I forget, Works and Relief Agency, I think it's its full name. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year through them. But has that gone into assisting the average person on the street? When you see all those water pipes turned into rockets.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not.
And all of the tunnels and all of the other structure that were built with that money, not to raise the level of living and public health and all that of the local citizens, but to do what you saw executed last week in the name of someone else.
This is one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's points in his book. It's like you see what we do with our land, you see what they do with their land. And, you see us
along the Israeli-Egyptian border ever?
No, never there. No, I've been to Haifa, and that's about the only place I've been to.
When you look down the border, particularly in that area, you look to the north, and it's green and farmland. You look to the south, it's desert.
Yeah.
The Israelis invest in their land.
Yeah.
And they have not done that on the other side. They're doing that now. The Egyptians are doing that now. It's more farmland now. But the investment in the land and in the life has not been put into by the people in Gaza and the people in Egypt, and to the relief of everybody in raising their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Certainly it has in Israel. The Israelis, what you saw in that festival, they've gotten very, very comfy. And I think they were trying to sustain that comfort and ignoring the signs of what was about to happen.
Yeah.
It's called cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Hey, I want to wrap this up, but I just want to make sure we cover anything else that you think is important that we understand. This is a super complex issue, and if we boil it down to what's on Twitter or what's on the news, we miss a lot of the nuance. I've got Dr. Ambassador Robert Hunter coming on in a little bit. We're going to talk about Iran's role. Cool. This is it's real complicated. So I appreciate you coming on and help us understand.
I think the role of whether the U.S. gets fatigued and whether we have the political will, for instance, if we get a Speaker of the House, if we have the political will to do those things that have been demonstrated that we need to do for our own safety, for our own protection, and to assist our allies and to do probably a pretty massive international relief that's going to be called on. Do we have the will, the capability, and the capacity to do that? And can we come together politically to do that are necessary?
No,
I think that's a big issue.
Yes. You know, one of the things we worry about, and rightfully so, because it's a corrupt place, is corruption in Ukraine, and then the corruption that we bring as a nation that doesn't, and look, I've got a lot of experience in this, it doesn't jump off the page as being a huge problem in Israel because they just need less help in these areas, right? But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, so if people complain about we shouldn't support Ukraine because they're corrupt, I go, hey, should we support Illinois?
Right.
So
yeah.
So hey, or California. So
hey, I live in California.
Yeah. So define corruption. Define the level of corruption you're talking about, and is invading another country. Should we not help them against that because they're corrupt? And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You come in and shoot everybody in the forehead, but we won't help them because they're corrupt. And I get confused by that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, listen, let's do another one of these things soon. It's definitely helpful to have someone come on who can lend some honesty and some real critique to the whole thing. Anything in closing before I roll these credits?
No, I'd be very interested to listening to the ambassador talk.
Yeah, we'll come back in a couple hours. You can sit in with us, and it'll be fun.
Very good.
I'm going to roll the credits. Stand by. I'll say goodbye in a sec. Here we go.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.